Hello, I'm Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz and doing a guest spot for policy.net.nz. We're doing a series of interviews with party leaders and finance spokespeople ahead of the election. And we've just spoken to Rodney, the MP for Epsom and the leader of ACT. And we asked him about what's wrong with the economy and how the government's involvement in the economy is a factor. Okay. Well, firstly, Rodney, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us here. We're doing a series of interviews with party leaders and economic spokespeople ahead of the election, and we wanted to find out what ACT is proposing ahead of the election and what you see the current situation. But firstly, what do you think is wrong with the economy?
Oh, the government. You know, it's a funny thing, we talk about things being wrong with the economy. The economy is, in one sense, a collection of people going about their business and freely trading their services and goods, and there's not much wrong with that. The difficulties that we have, the government takes a big chunk of it, and controls and directs such a big chunk. And so when you talk about the economy, you're really talking about the government and its impact on the economy, and that's where I fundamentally disagree with what's happening in New Zealand over years and years and years and years.
What specifically has the government done which has hurt the economy, do you think?
It's not just this government. I don't get into the thing of saying Labor did this and National did that and who was right and who was wrong or who were the clever managers. But what you've seen is, over my lifetime, is a huge encroachment of the government in terms of its spending. So its tax and spending is way, way too high. And of course its regulation. So red tape's through the roof. And specifically, government's got off its core functions and done just about everything. And at the same time, it hasn't recognised people's property rights or freedom to contract. It's basically obliterated that with a whole lot of legislation that no one watching this video can be compliant with.
So where has the government spent too much and encroached on the rest of the economy specifically?
Well, you can just take whole swathes of it really. Welfare is out of control. You shouldn't have government in the whole business of running a business. Politicians can't run a business, so you just get out of that. But specifically what we've said is, how do you handle this politically? Because it's one thing to have, if you like, the ideal, and here we are, and more particularly it's being run by politicians that need votes. And the way our political system's set up, and indeed all the Western world, people win a vote by taxing everyone and then handing out the money to the students or to the old people or to this particular business, and slowly they line up the interest groups that they need in order to win. That's become even more obvious under MMP as people chase the party votes, and you have all the other MMP parties other than ACT sort of getting money for their particular voter from the taxpayer. So what that does is set up a ratchet effect that government spending goes up and up. And it's one thing to have a little party sitting there on 2% or 5% saying, oh no, this is bad, this is bad. It ain't going to change it. So I've spent a lot of time in my time in Parliament thinking about how do you deal with this systematically, which is I think what you need to do. And I've come to the conclusion that we need sort of a quasi-constitutional approach in terms of both government spending and red tape. I'll come to red tape shortly. And by that I mean rules that constrain the ability of politicians to win votes by taxing hard and spending money, rather than actually win votes by spending money as carefully as you'd spend your own. And the key thing that you would do is you would take government spending and you just hold it in real terms, and you'd make an adjustment for the rate of inflation and population growth. Now what we've done is we've written a taxpayer rights bill that does precisely that. So if governments want to spend above that amount, they can, but they actually need the consent of taxpayers.
Where do you limit government spending in terms of, I'm imagining, GDP per capita, or how?
You take it what it is now and you limit it there. So I'll come to that in a second. So what you can then say politically is, I'm not cutting government spending. I'm just holding it, right? Now, what that does mean is that if you want to find some more spending, you've got two choices. One is you've got to cut it from somewhere else, or you've actually got to get taxpayers' consent. And I think that's a good idea because it's their money. If you do that, then what happens is over time, the size of government as a fraction of GDP diminishes, because obviously the economy is growing, hopefully faster than the rate of inflation, and hopefully a lot faster. Indeed, with these sort of policies it would. And so the government will be shrinking. In real terms it won't be, but as a proportion of GDP it will be. What happens now is as the economy grows, so too does the government. And in fact it grows almost at a faster rate. So we're reversing that. And so that's what I mean by a systematic trend. And you change the dynamic. It does for fiscal policy what the Reserve Bank Act does for monetary policy. So for all of my lifetime, we'd learned to live with high and enduring and erratic inflation. The Reserve Bank Act came along, and it changed the incentives for politicians. And so since then, we've actually got used to living in a low inflation environment, 0 to 2 or 0 to 3. And that Reserve Bank Act has withstood changes of government, MMP, because the structure is sound, and the politicians just can't come along and say, look, there's an election coming up, let's loosen credit and try and take the votes that will come from that. We've got a much sounder basis to monetary policy. We've done the same thing for the government accounts with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, so that required transparent government accounts. It's a fantastic piece of legislation. But we haven't done that for the total quantum of money that government spends. And that's what our Taxpayer Rights Bill is designed to do.
So if you're going to cap government spending, and as you say, as the economy grows, you're going to need to make decisions about where you don't spend the money or cut spending. Where would you cut it?
Well, first thing is it's an MMP framework that I've provided, or ACT is providing, so it may not be us. That's a bit like, you set up the Reserve Bank Act in 1989, and here we are in 2008, and we're still living within the framework because it's a sound framework. So what we'd be proposing to do is to set up the framework. We may not even necessarily be Minister of Finance within that framework, operating within it. For my part, it makes me ill sitting in Parliament and seeing government and seeing the money it wastes, millions and millions of dollars. And there's whole departments that you could just sort of shut down. Now, some of them only spend a few million, but, you start saving a few million, it adds up.
Which ones?
Oh, why do we have a Families Commission? It just irks the hell out of me. We have affairs, Pacific Island affairs, youth affairs, you name it, every affair under the sun. And we fund it. And what's it done? It's just to make a minister or a politician look good, that they're doing something. You'll be sitting in a select committee and they'll send a list of all the government departments that need a financial review. And half of them you don't know, you didn't know existed. And yet we're funding them. And I think it's very much sort of yes minister, these little departments are a little in there running in their own world. So you put the framework in place, and then you could actually get serious and say what's important. Of course, what's happened in government is that we've forgotten the core function of government, which is fundamentally to keep us safe from the thugs and the bullies, and so we spend money on everything else bar that. So I think that would be a very, very powerful piece of legislation and a major policy change, and you'd create an incentive for politicians to be careful and good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, whereas right now every incentive is to spend more money. I mean, every budget, politicians trumpet the fact of how they've spent more money. The only thing they need to do is sort of run a slight surplus, or the surplus is a measure of good economic management, but so what? If you're wasting so much money to begin with, it's the total quantum that matters. The other thing that happens in government is that we take the existing government spending and then we layer it on top, And indeed, even in your question, you're sort of saying, well, okay, here's the government spending,